as I said earlier, I'm not really in favor of this commission taking on too much too fast. For example, one of the first things it did was to find the federal income tax on wages to be unconstitutional, it would create a firestorm. That would be taking on too much too fast. Right. I'm in favor of it doing that, but not the first thing. So I think even among liberals, you will find some who think some federal actions are unconstitutional. There are a lot of ACLU types that actually agree with libertarians on a lot of legal issues, especially in Texas. The ACLU of Texas is not like the National ACLU. It's a separate organization, and that they, for example, believe in the Second Amendment, which the National ACLU does not. So, I think among the people who have written scholarly articles on constitutional topics include a lot of practicing lawyers, including a lot of the guys who run for public office for judicial positions on libertarian ticket. It includes a lot of law professors, historians, and other people who I think that if they comprise the pool of 230 that my legislation calls for, and if 23 of those were selected at random, that you would probably get a mix that would not be too bold, but it would be just bold enough to take on federal actions in a good order. Less important ones at first, and become bolder and bolder and bolder until they eventually they get a lot of public demands on them to be bolder and bolder and bolder. And this might eventually lead to this ramping up, this groundswell of public resistance that would become also more and more better informed. So that's the dynamic I'm trying to organize here. It might not work, but of course a lot of things we might try might not work. It's worth a try.
And so how did you come to the number 230 for your pool? I mean, versus 100 or 500? Or what's about that number?
I don't think there's probably more than about 230 in Texas.
That's fair.
And if the selection of 23 were about 10% of it at any given time, then you keep rotating through them.
Right.
The idea is not to make it a permanent body where guys are having to serve
lifetime terms.
Lifetime terms. Maybe serve for 6 months at most, and then rotate through another group, and have staggered terms. So it would be a constantly changing mix of 23. The number 23 is a standard number for a grand jury, so that a majority is 12. A grand jury should always decide by a vote of 12. If you only have a quorum of, say, 16, they would still need to be by a vote of 12. So you want to get a bunch of guys who are likely to show up to meetings, and so that you can easily get a vote of 12 to declare something unconstitutional. And you need to have people who are a little better trained than the average citizen. I have worked with panels of average citizens, and it's probably not a good idea to have ordinary laymen trying to decide that something is unconstitutional. At least not until they're better educated on the Constitution. I'm hoping that this commission system will drive that process so that down the road we could pick from among the general citizenry and have it work. But the public education has not prepared them yet to do that. We still have a lot of educating of the public to go before they're ready for that.
And then one more question. Like you said, you wouldn't want them immediately to attack something as big as federal withholding taxes. Do you think nullification concerning the healthcare legislation currently in Congress, do you think that's too big to bite off in the next year, or do you think that's a good starting point? Where are you on that?
That's a good starting point, but of course, right now we don't have a bill.
Right.
One of the problems with many of these nullification proposals is that they're trying to anticipate a bill that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
And that really doesn't work. A nullification edict has to be about something fairly specific, such as requiring people to buy insurance. Further down the road, it could take on something bigger like, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security.
Right.
But those would be big deals. Initially, it needs to pick on things that are going to be initially popular for the Commission to do, unpopular for the federal government to do, and to build on that. And many of the elements of the proposed health care package would seem to fit that. That is, after all, what's driving the current proposals for this nullification. But unless and until we actually get a bill enacted, we don't have anything to work on. So we need to have a commission or something like it in place to be ready when that happens. And it can't be, we can't wait another 2 years, or the 2 years legislative cycle to enact something afterwards. It needs to be anticipatory. It could, for example, do things like take on the Real ID Act. That has been effectively nullified by states not passing, legislation to fund it. Well, the refusal to fund it is certainly one way to do it, but again, a state that doesn't have continuous legislative sessions, like Texas, presents a problem. So it would be much better to have a body in place that to take a complaint, even in anticipation. You see, one of the benefits of a grand jury is that it does not have to only deal with cases and controversies where somebody has been injured, the way the federal courts have decided to do. There was a time when the cases and controversies language was written where it was considered okay for any citizen to privately prosecute a public right, to do something like challenge the constitutionality of an act of Congress even before it had been applied to him individually, causing him injury. And the Frothingham v. Mellon decision also in 1923 held that the Supreme Court would consider a person not to have standing if he had not been personally injured. So that knocked out the whole legacy of private prosecution of public rights. You have to wait to be injured before you can sue. Well, that's not entirely satisfactory, but a grand jury is not such limited.
Right.
A grand jury can find anything, and in particular it can find that, well, if and when a bill to do this is ever enacted, it will be unconstitutional.
Right.
It can be anticipatory.
Right.
And there's a real need for something to be anticipatory.
Right.
So such commissions could really emerge as a kind of parallel judicial structure to review legislation. I could foresee review commissions being set up in counties to review state legislation, or all kinds of things like them being set up, all over the place to review this and review that, and